I think I wore myself out last night at our adult faith formation class on angels and demons. It was quite an involved class, and so my brain's a bit tired this morning. I would like to expound upon the first reading of the Psalm of the Gospel, but not today. We'll have to save that for another day. I want to speak about our saint today because it's rather relevant to our present situation. You know, we as Americans, we think that somehow slavery began with the United States, that somehow when we were founded, we brought slaves over, and that's when slavery began. And slavery did not begin then. It goes way, 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 way back. It is actually a human phenomenon that humans have always treated other humans as property. After the fall of Adam and Eve, we see this disrespect for others in such a way that people are used by other people for their own benefit. We can go back as far as the earliest of scriptures, to the book of Genesis. Think about how Abraham's grandson was a slave. Abraham's grandson, Joseph. And he was sold into slavery by his own brothers to their second cousins, who then sold him to slavery in Egypt. And we see throughout all of it, a good chunk of our even Christian Judeo faith is about the freedom of the Jews from slavery. The Jews were slaves for 400 years in Egypt. And then the poor Jews, after everything else, thousands of years later, after Christ rises from the dead and ascends, the Romans come in 70 AD, they destroy Jerusalem, and they take the Jews as slaves to Rome. Roman roads were built by Jewish slaves. Many of the great edifices of the Roman Empire were built by slaves, Jewish slaves mostly. Slavery was something extremely, way too common throughout all of history in every land and every nation that was slowly being eradicated over time and over history. You know, we think about Africa itself. It's a big continent, Africa. And many, many countries, and many, within those countries, many tribes who would sell each other into slavery, just as we had it going on in other continents. Here in the United States, among the American Indians, it was happening. In South America, it was a horrible reality and evidence to the fact of original sin. That the human heart could be so cruel that it could enslave another human person for their own benefit. It's a sad reality. Christianity did a lot to eradicate slavery from the world, but at times Christians themselves participated in such horrors. At the same time, beautiful Christians stepped up to care for them and try to free them. Whenever the human person turns away from God, we become less human. We become more like Satan, who could care less about human will. The devil is a slaver in the truest sense of the word, that he cares not for the freedom of the human person, but seeks to enslave them into evil. And so we turn away from God. The more we turn to evil, the more we become like the evil one and less like God, who is the God of true freedom. When we are more like God and enter into holiness of life, we respect the dignity and the freedom of individuals for who they are and assist them to become the fullness of who they are. Not keeping them down by continually handing them, but give them the hand up. What's the old line? Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach him to fish and he'll eat for a lifetime. Right? So the reality of assisting people to step up and to rise out of poverty and so forth, not to oppress. The more we're like God, the more we seek to assist the freedom of others. And today, our beautiful saint today is we have his feast day only on the American calendar, and then down in Colombia, he's not on the universal calendar because of our own reality, of our own struggles with slavery as Americans. We were one of many nations who had slavery. It wasn't just an American phenomenon. Back before the founding of the United States, St. Peter Claver, today's saint, was a Jesuit who went from Spain to Colombia as a missionary to Colombia in the middle of the 1600s, before the founding of the U.S., before the American Revolution. There was slave trading going on, and particularly between Africa and Jamaica and Haiti and the islands and South America. And when Peter Claver, this Jesuit priest, saw what was going on and the horrible way these people were being treated, there was nothing he could do by the government, so he decided he would become the slave to the slaves. And he would work so tirelessly to care for those who brought over. The first thing he would do when a boat would show up with slaves, he'd rush onto that boat and begin to care for the sick. He tried to tend to them. He would use his own clothes to cover them. Then he would wash them. He would use wine to wash their wounds. I guess that was a bit of a remedy back then, but he would use wine to wash their wounds and so tenderly care for these people and assist them. And by his charity, by his beautiful works of mercy, he was able to not only care for the sick and for the poor and for the enslaved, but by his work and his life, he proclaimed the dignity of the human person, of each of these human persons. Eventually when our country was founded, we entered into the same horrible trading as other countries were doing, but thanks be to God, through the working of the great revolution we had, unfortunately so many lives lost over it, but the beautiful president of Abraham Lincoln, the emancipation, slavery was done away with in the U.S., and America led the charge against slavery throughout the world. America became truly a beacon of light. This is historical stuff that unfortunately is being wiped from our history books from our children, and that America led away. But it's not over yet. Slavery still goes on. It still goes on in some countries in Africa. It's still happening. It's still happening in some corners of the world. And I dare say, in a different way, it still happens here in the United States. One of the reasons of the need to protect our southern border is because thousands of children and tens of thousands of women are brought across that border for sex slave trafficking. Not being targeted for the color of their skin, but for how they can be used sexually. Just last week, the government broke up a sex slave operation of children across 7 states here. In Georgia, 38 children were found and rescued, children who were read as missing. 9 in Indianapolis. Over 60 children was rescued from sex slavery, sex trafficking, which still happens. And unfortunately, the internet promotes it, and the porous southern border is what makes it come through it so easily. That's why the need to protect the border is to actually figure out who's being brought in, who belongs to who, because so many children. There's actually a company, a private company that tries to rescue children from these horrible operations. Horrendous things. Truly heroic people working like St. Joseph, our saint today, to rescue and assist those who are broken, the slaves of the slaves, those who are slaving tirelessly to save those who are still being used. The only remedy for our present situation, our society today, the only remedy is holiness. It's not in politics, it's not in policies. It's an individual holiness. It's the calling of the human person to come back to the Lord, to come as close and to be like God as much as possible. After all, that's our nature. We're made in the image and likeness of God. The only answer to our present tragedy throughout the world is unity with God, holiness of life. Because the more we come close to God, the more we become like the God whose image and likeness we are made, the more we will reverence the dignity of every single human person from conception to natural death. The dignity of the human person. God bestows dignity. And the more we are close to God, and the more of us who are closer to God, the more we will reverence and protect the dignity of each and every human person. May St. Peter Claver today convict us of these truths of our faith, of the dignity of each and every human person, that every single human person should be respected, honored, and reverenced as not only a creature of God, but an image of God, one made in his image and likeness and redeemed by the blood of Christ. Every human person worth the death of the Son of God. May God bless you, and Mary keep you.